Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Traverse Area District Library Zoom programming. You can find all of our events at TADL.org/events. And most of them are recorded, like this one will be as well, and available on our YouTube channel, which is TADL Not Just Books. Tonight, we are going to be talking about myths busted, what you thought you knew just ain't so, about history myths. So Mr. Robert Myers from the Historical Society of Michigan is going to help us bust those history myths. Welcome back, Bob. How are you tonight?
Thank you. I am just ducky. How about you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Good. All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be back, at least two-dimensionally here. And so we are going to do some myths busted. This is a participatory game, so you get to play along. Grab pencil and paper, pen and paper, or what have you, because this is going to be multiple, and actually not multiple choice. It's going to be true and false. So you get 25 questions, true or false, and what we'll do is we'll give you the question. We'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Take your best guess. Maybe you even know, if you get all 25 of them right, then you really should be ashamed that you know that much trivia. So we're going to, let's see, I'm going to do a screen share here. And let's see, come on, there we go. All right. So we're going to see how much you know about history and some of the myths that we get, because we get a lot of we get a lot of mythology in history, and the crazy thing is that some of it really is true, and often the things that you didn't think were true really are, or the things that you absolutely knew. This was absolutely true, gospel truth, and it turns out it wasn't. So what you thought you knew, you just ain't so. The internet has been great, but it's a double-edged sword. As Abraham Lincoln said, don't believe everything you read on the internet. It's not always true, believe it or not. But the internet has been wonderful for historians because it lets us make links with things that often we never would have before. It's opening up, so many materials have been digitized. Newspapers and libraries are just leading the way in this, my goodness. Digitizing books and newspapers and so forth. And you can do, as you probably know, you can do keyword searches. And I'm working on a project right now, and I'm finding stuff that I never would have found because I would have spent lifetimes hunting for it. The downside is, of course, that the mythology spreads too. And so I always tell people that with the internet, the process really hasn't changed. The methodology hasn't changed because you have to assess the sources that you're looking at. Are they valid or not? Are they credible sources? And as we all know, a lot of junk gets put out there as well. So that said, we're going to look at some common myths in history. Again, these are all true or false. So you get to take your best shot at it. Maybe you know, maybe you don't, maybe you just want to guess. And we're going to give you a couple of seconds, and then we'll go to the answer. So it's actually, I forgot to change that. It's 25 questions. All the questions are true or false. No fair Googling or phoning a friend. You have to rely on your own knowledge of useless information for this. And the person with the best score gets a fabulous prize. But actually, that is a big fat lie. There is no prize. There is nothing. It's a cold world. So, but you do get the honor and glory of bragging rights. So there you go. So here we go with question number 1. Everybody ready? Doesn't matter whether you are or not, because I can't see you. So here we go. The myth, the rule of thumb. You've probably heard this one. In 1782, Judge Sir Francis Buller in England, this is in England, ruled that a man could beat his wife with a stick so long as it was no thicker than his thumb. And from that, we get the expression that we use today, the rule of thumb. And here we have Judge Buller there with the wig and a bundle of sticks. So that is the myth, at least. But is it true? Is that true that that's where we get the phrase, the rule of thumb? You know, we do something by a rule of thumb, true or false. Take your best guess. I'm not going to wait on you forever. All right, here we go. Ready? Doesn't matter. It's false. That is false. That is not where we get the term rule of thumb. It does not appear in English law. No evidence links it with Judge Buller. It goes back to 1685 in this term, or this writing. Many professed Christians are like to foolish builders who build by guess and by rule of thumb, as we used to speak, and not by square and rule. So it has nothing to do with beating your wife or anything like that. It's simply really the way that we commonly think of the phrase today is just kind of by guess. Rather than by actual measurement or something like that. That's where we get the term rule of thumb. Has nothing to do with beating your wife with a stick that's no bigger than your thumb. All right, here's the second one. The pineapple. Oh my goodness. Anytime you go to a museum gift shop or anything, you see pineapples on dish towels and on oh gosh, trivets and everything else. And that is because the pineapple is a symbol of hospitality. Well, how did it become a symbol of hospitality? Well, it's because ship captains would announce their return home. They'd be gone, you know, on those sailing vessels, they'd be gone sometimes for a year or more at a time, depending on what they were doing, where the voyage would take them. And so when they returned, after these long voyages, they would take a pineapple and they would stick it on a picket fence. And that would announce to people that they were home. Again, remember, this is the days long before telephones and that sort of thing, when you could, or emails, when you could just let everybody know, hey, I'm home, come and visit me. People did not expect them to be home because they'd been gone so long. And so they would take that pineapple and put it on the picket fence. But is that myth true or false? Take your best guess. All right, so here we go. Everybody ready? That is false. Has absolutely nothing to do with ship captains. In fact, it originated with Dole. Trying to sell pineapples. They did an ad and made that a common idea that the pineapple was a symbol of hospitality. Pineapples were expensive. You didn't take a pineapple, spend good money on it, and stick it on your picket fence. That was, you wanted to eat that. If you were fortunate enough to get one, you'd want to eat it. Now, today it has become a symbol of hospitality because the ad campaign was successful. But no, it has nothing to do with ship captains being gone on long voyages. Number 3, we're going to go back in ancient history now. Ancient Rome. The Roman Emperor Gaius, more commonly known as Caligula, made his favorite horse Incitatus, I can't talk. Yeah, his horse, a senator. Well, that's because he was so famously corrupt and so forth that he made his horse a Roman senator. You know, we see the downfall of Rome in that, the corruption of Rome, the drink and so forth, the evilness. But is that true? Did he really make his horse a senator? True or false? Take your best guess. And the answer is false. He had bad press. There were Roman historians, Suetonius and Dio. They wrote decades after his death, and they told some stretchers. And one of them was that he had made his horse a senator. And they were just trying to make him out to be a lot worse than he really was. And the contemporary accounts are clear that no, he did not make his horse a senator. So Rome may have been corrupt in other ways, but not in this case. That is false. Number 4, here's the myth. Oh man, we've all heard of the Salem witch trials, famous in American history, the play The Crucible by Arthur Miller about the Salem witch trials, kind of an allegory for McCarthyism of the 1950s. But during those Salem witch trials in the 1690s, witches were burned at the stake. We go to Salem, Massachusetts, and there witches were burned at the stake. But were they? Were they actually burned at the stake? True or false? Is that myth true or false during those Salem witch trials? Are you ready? True or false? And the truth is no. 19 witches were hanged. 1 man was crushed under heavy stones. They called it pressing, but none were burned. Of course, you do get the great bit from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. What do you burn apart from witches? More witches. So one of my favorite movies. So bear with me on that. I love Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Not bad history either in some ways. All right, number 5. Here's another myth from American history. We're getting now into the 18th century here. The slang term for $1, we call $1 a buck. You know, I've got a buck in my pocket. How much is that? $5, $10, you know, that kind of thing. Well, that term buck that we use comes from buckskins used in the fur trade. So, you know, you're back in the fur trade, they're not using currency. They're not using dollar bills or gold coin or silver coin, but people would come in and they would trade furs like buckskins for trade goods. And out of that comes our term buck for a buckskin, or now for money, for currency. That's the myth. Is that myth true or is it false? All right, everybody ready? All right, here we go. That is true. It really does. That is where we get the term for $1, is from buckskins. I checked it. I didn't believe that. I thought, no, that isn't true. That's a myth. And did some primary source research on it. And yeah, it is true. That is where the term buck comes from. Now, it didn't relate exactly to $1. A buckskin wasn't worth $1, but that is in fact where we get our term for the currency. The dollar, as it says here, derived from the 16th century Bohemian coin called a thaler dollar. But the term for a buck, it really does come from the fur trade and the use of buckskins. And that one surprised me. I did not know that. All right, here's another one. Boy, if you go to historic sites, you hear this all the time. People were shorter back then. People in the 18th century, 16th, 17th, 18th century, much shorter than today. 5'6" to about, or 5'4" to about 5'6" in height. And a man like George Washington, who stood a little over 6 feet tall, famous for his height, because he was so much taller than the common man at the time. But is that really true? Were people really shorter back then? Was the average height of a man or a woman considerably smaller? Now, take your best guess. Is that truth, or is that simply one of those false myths? True.
I'm going to say it's true.
What's that, do you think?
I'm going to say it's true.
True. Is that true? True.
We'll
Your vote, Betsy, goes for true. All right, here we go. It is false. People are slightly taller today. Average height for a man today, it was actually just revised not long ago to 5'9". Back in the 18th century, it was about 5'8". And how do we know that? Well, one of the ways we know that is from all of the military muster rolls in armies back at that time, especially the Continental Army. They recorded a man's height, and it averaged out to about 5'8". A woman today is about 5'4" on average. And I do 18th century reenacting, among other foolish things. And so we use various things like muskets and so forth that are built exactly the same way they were back then. And yeah, they're about right. I'm actually 5'8", and it's just perfect for me. Yeah, the average height today, it's about the same as it was back then. Slightly taller, but not markedly so. Well, how about beds? What did they do with those? Now, if you've been to historic sites, you've seen a lot of beds there in historic house exhibits and so forth. And the beds actually back then were shorter. And you could see that. It's very evident that the beds were shorter. And well, we know people weren't shorter, but the beds were. But is that true? Were the beds actually shorter than a standard bed today? True or false? Take your guess. Drum roll, please. And the answer is false. The beds are about the same size as today. People were about the same height or length if you're lying down, and so were the beds. Now, they didn't have the standard mattresses like we have today, but the beds were about the same size. But they did have they had these big tall canopies like this one here, and it makes the bed look a lot shorter. And I've been to some places where it's like, oh my gosh, that bed's about 5 foot in length is all. They said, nah, get out a tape measure. And it's the same length as a bed today. So that one is false. Well, here's another myth. Pirate ships. Yar, matey. Oh my goodness. We see that a few years ago, pirates were really big. I guess that movie Pirates of the Caribbean. The myth is that pirate ships flew a skull and crossbones flag, like the one you see here. And so if there was a pirate ship out there, that it was like as not, it would be flying the skull and crossbones, the Jolly Roger. But is that true or false? Did pirates really fly a skull and crossbones flag? Or is that just kind of TV and Hollywood and maybe Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island and things like that? 16 men on a bottle of rum, yo ho ho, that kind of thing. Is that really true that they flew a skull and crossbones flag, or is that simply another historical myth? And go ahead, Betsy.
I would guess because Disney has it, it's got to be true, right?
Well, it's got to be true, yeah. If it's in Disney, yeah. Well, my wife, who's a costumer, and some of our friends just had a conniption fit over Pirates of the Caribbean, because they're mixing like 2 centuries worth of clothing in that movie. And I said, Candace, it's a movie, it's Disney, it's for fun. Well, the costuming is all wrong. So, but how about the skull and crossbones flag? Is that wrong too? No, it is not. They really did fly skull and crossbones. Now, we don't know what they all look like. There are no surviving pirate flags, unfortunately, but we do have descriptions of them. And this is one here, and kind of an artist's conception of a pirate flag flown over Bartholomew Roberts' ship. But some of them were described as a skull and crossbones on them. So yes, indeed, they really did fly skull and crossbones flags. So that part of things like Pirates of the Caribbean, that's absolutely true. I used to work at a museum, and we had a log cabin there. We had a bed warmer in there on display, and I would take kids through on tours. None of them knew what the bed warmer was. It was a pan, and you would put hot coals in it and run the pan, had a long handle, and you would run the pan over the bed blankets and everything and to warm it up. And all of a sudden, all the kids knew what it was. I said, how do they know that? Well, it was in Pirates of the Caribbean. And so all of a sudden, all of them knew, oh, that's a bed warmer. That's a bed warmer. I said, of course, now it's Disney, so they got a couple of things wrong. And one was that they would take the bed warmer and stick it under the blankets, which it would warm your bed up, but it would also set the blankets on fire. So I said, okay, they didn't do that. They rubbed it over the blankets. And the other thing they got wrong was that they were using a bed warmer in the Caribbean. So probably the last place you'd want to have your bed heated up. But at any rate, okay, well, kind of on that pirate theme and 18th century theme, number 9, the myth is that you have these long tavern pipes like the one here in the picture. You can buy them today at Colonial Williamsburg and other sites. They're made of kale and clay. And they have these long stems. They're also known as a churchwarden pipe. And the reason for the long stem was that you would, at a tavern, hence the name, you would pass this pipe around. People would, the men would sit there in the tavern, like the gentleman on the right there, who's kind of standing there, and they would be smoking a pipe, and you would pass it to your neighbor, and he would just snap the end of the stem off of that pipe, and then he could smoke it as well without having somebody else having stuck it in their mouth. And then he'd be able to snap off the end, pass it to somebody else. And that way you could smoke the pipe without having your neighbors spit all over the pipe stem. And hence the reason for that long pipe stem. Great story, but is it true or false? True or false? The reason for the tavern pipe long stem was that basically sanitation. You could snap that stem off and pass it to your neighbor. True or false? And the answer to that is false. Had nothing to do with it. Kept the smoke away from your face. Gave you a cooler smoke. But no, they didn't care. They did not pass the pipes around. In fact, the clay pipes like that were dirt cheap. They're almost the only thing today that's more expensive than it was in the 18th century is a clay pipe. They were mass produced. They were cheap, and no, they didn't pass them from person to person. They would just smoke their pipe and had nothing to do with sanitation. All right, number 10. In the 18th century, we're kind of keeping with this 18th century theme here. Most men of the 18th century wore powdered wigs. They would wear powdered wigs, still worn by English judges today, part of the tradition of England. But in the 18th century, did most men wear powdered wigs like the gentleman here in the picture? Was that commonplace or not? True or false? Did most men in the 18th century wear a powdered wig? Take your best guess. Write it down. No Googling. And here we go. The answer is no, they didn't. That is false. That is a myth. About 5% of men wore wigs. A wig was expensive. The better quality wigs were made out of human hair. They would use a variety of hair. The cheapest ones were made out of goat hair. But in any case, a wig was expensive. So why would a man wear one? Well, it was personal preference. Just did you want to wear a wig or not? Yeah, they could be stylish. But it was simply personal preference. Some men wore them. Thomas Jefferson, for example, never wore a wig, or not often, if ever. But other men did. John Adams did wear a wig. So it was just, did you want to wear a wig or not? It was really personal preference. Number 11, one of my favorite, I'm an architecture nut, and this is one of my favorite architectural styles, Second Empire. And the Second Empire house is distinguished by the roof there. It's called a mansard roof, and the mansard roof incorporates a second or third story into it. So the roof structure is actually a floor of the house, one story of the house. They were sometimes straight like this one, but often the sides of it were concave or convex. But there's a reason for that. The reason for it is that houses were taxed according to the number of floors they had, the number of stories to the house. Well, a house like this one, no, it looks like a 3-story house, but for the tax assessor, it's only 2 stories because the roof structure is part of that's a floor. That's not a floor up there. That's just the roof up there. So it's a way to avoid taxes. You can have a larger house, more floor space, an extra story, but you don't get nailed for taxes with a house like this, and hence the mansard roof. But is that true, or is that simply a myth? True or false? And the answer is false. Nope. The houses were not taxed by the number of stories they had. It was just a way of getting more living space into the house. Of course, I do love that. One of the reasons I do love the Second Empire style is that Charles Addams used it in one of his absolute classic cartoons of the Addams Family, preparing to pour boiling oil down on the Christmas carolers. Love that. And of course, if you see a picture of a haunted house, quote unquote, anywhere, it's always one of these Second Empire style houses. They were popular here in America in the 1860s, 1870s. Not a huge number of them built. It was never as popular as some of the other styles like Greek Revival or Queen Anne, but I just do love the Second Empire style. It's a great architectural style. Number 12, keeping with our house theme here, here's the myth: widow's walks. This flat roof with a railing up on the top of the house. And the reason for it being a widow's walk was that women, widows or wives actually of sailors, ship captains and so forth, they would go up to this walk to watch for their husbands to return from the sea. Again, this is the years before cell phones and email and radio and anything like that. And so these men would be gone for weeks, months, even a year or two. And when their wives awaited their return, they would expected their return, they would go up to the walk at the top of the house. You could see way out over the ocean, and of course, and await their ship. But of course, many of these men never did return. Shipwrecks and illness and so forth, they never came home. And it became known from that as a widow's walk, because so many of the widows who went up there to walk and pace and look out over the ocean, in fact, had become widows. But is that really true or not? True or false? Myth or reality? And the answer is false. It was simply an architectural feature like a Second Empire style house. It did have some practical aspects to it. They would have a roof hatch up there, and so you could get up onto the roof rather than putting a ladder up the side of the house. To crawl up the side of the house, you could just walk out onto the roof from that structure up there. And of course, people are burning wood oftentimes, and so you had to clean the chimney, and there could be chimney fires. So it allowed you access to the chimneys and cleaning and that sort of thing. But basically, it was an architectural style feature. And no, women did not go up there and await their husband's ship returning from the sea. In fact, you see a lot of them here in the middle of Michigan, and that we are kind of devoid of oceans here in the middle of the mitten. So no, it was just an architectural feature. Number 13, the American Revolution. This is one you may have learned in school. The Continental Army won the war because our army, the Continental Army, patriots, had learned by bitter experience that you could not fight a battle European style, where men would stand shoulder to shoulder and fire in volleys. In Europe, maybe because you've got open fields there. This is all open land in Europe. Most of the forests were gone, and so it was farmers' fields. But here in America, it's a different story. Woods, trees. The British Army, hidebound, insisted on standing shoulder to shoulder like they would do in European battles. The Continental Army had learned you don't do that. You get behind trees and rocks and fire from cover. And the British also are wearing brightly colored red uniforms, so they stand out and they make perfect targets. And because of this, the Continental Army was able to win the war. But is that true? Is that really true? Or is that simply a myth?
We think it's true.
You think it's true? You're going to put a T for true on that.
Yes, we are.
All right. Very good. Let's see how you do. It is false. The British Army fought exactly, the Continental Army fought exactly the way the British Army fought. They stood shoulder to shoulder, firing in volleys. Well, why on earth did they do that? Why, doesn't it make sense that you would take cover? Not really. The technology of the time dictated the tactics. You would, if our battles were fought not so much to inflict casualties, but to drive the enemy away. You wanted to drive them away from a town or a strategic point or something like that. The muskets at the time were tremendously inaccurate. At 100 yards distance, the length of a football field, the safest place to be was where someone was aiming, because they'd never hit you. If you got down to about 40 or 50 yards, the musket was deadly, but that's getting pretty close. So you fired the muskets all together, just like a shotgun going off. Somebody would hit something. In fact, the French army at the time, in the time of the American Revolution, the French army estimated that about 2%, at 100 yards distance, 2% of the musket balls would hit the target. 2%. Now, did it happen where the Continentals fought behind trees and rocks? On occasion, twice really. Concord and Lexington in 1775 and Kings Mountain in I think 1780. But the other battles, like at Princeton and Yorktown and Saratoga, they used Continental Army tactics. It was what worked. Well, here's another myth. Why were muskets so long? You can see these guys here, reenactors. They're standing there with their muskets that are about roughly 5 feet long there. Why were they so long? Well, the myth is that it comes from greedy fur traders. Fur traders charged Native Americans who were out hunting the furs a stack of furs as long as the musket was, or as high as the musket was tall, to purchase a musket. Well, you get more furs if you make the musket longer. And so the muskets got progressively longer and longer and longer because you could force the natives to pay that much in a pile of furs. But is that true? Is that true or false? T or F? True or false? And the answer is false. Had nothing to do with that. And in fact, The prices varied a lot, but in 1795, a musket cost about 12 beaver pelts. Certainly nothing like a stack of beaver pelts as high as a musket would be. And the Native Americans were very canny traders. If you read the original accounts of trading with Native Americans, you realize they were smart. They knew a good deal. Now, if you went to a village for the first, if they'd never encountered a European fur trader before, and they had not seen beads and muskets and blankets and kettles and cloth, yeah, you might get a pretty good deal out of them. But they'd been trading with other tribes for centuries. So they very quickly caught on to quality and quantity. And they would say, you know, we want good quality. Let us feel the blankets first. We want to feel the weight of the blanket. Is it a good thick blanket? When you weigh out when you measure out gunpowder that we're trading for, we want the full measure. No sticking your thumb down in the powder and cheating us on that. We want the full measure. We want, you know, the muskets you brought, they're no good. The quality isn't any good. We want good quality muskets. So they were very canny fur traders, and you would not take advantage of them. If anything, they drove hard bargains, and sometimes the fur traders were just exasperated with them because they'd have blankets. No, the color isn't right. We don't like the color. So, you know, it's going to keep you just as warm. No. There's a fur trader, you know, like 300 miles away, but he's got what we want. And say, look, you're going to have to go 300 miles. That was okay. They didn't mind. So yeah, you didn't take advantage of them in the trade. Number 15, here's another myth. Men posed for portraits with one hand stuck inside their vest, like the gentleman here. That's actually a waistcoat that he's wearing. But they would stick their hand inside a vest or a waistcoat. And they did that because fingers are hard to draw. Fingers are hard to paint. And artists would give them a little bit of a discount if they didn't have to paint the fingers. And if you look at children's drawings, children will almost always, they will draw human figures without the hands. The hands will be in pockets behind the back, they'll pose the figure behind the wall, anything so they don't have to draw the hands. And for adult artists too, that is difficult. And so you pose somebody with their hand inside their waistcoat and you get a discount because you don't have to do the drawing or the painting. But is that true or false? True or false?
False. We say it's false.
False. Any other votes for false?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's false too.
You think it's false too? Okay, well, let's see what you do here. You're absolutely right. It is false. It had nothing to do with it. It was a formal pose. So here you see William Tecumseh Sherman, the famous General Sherman of the Civil War, his hand inside his coat. The photographer didn't care whether he had his hand outside his coat or inside his coat. It's not going to be any harder to take his picture, but it was considered a very formal pose. And so if you're wanting to look formal and stern, like General Sherman here, he looks like he's ready to bite somebody's head off. That was a good way to pose. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is false. Had nothing to do with it. Number 16, here's a myth, another myth. SOS, the distress call. Well, it's Morse code and it stands for save our ship. Save our ship. It was used, this is the Titanic, artist's conception of the Titanic sinking. And in fact, it was used by the wireless operators on the Titanic when she went down in 1912. They were sending the SOS. And it stands for Save Our Ship. SOS, Save Our Ship. But is that true or false? What do you think? True or false? And the answer is false. It doesn't stand for anything. In fact, before SOS was used, wireless operators for a distress call were using CQD. And CQ was a message intended for any listener. So in other words, you might be, if you were on a ship as a wireless operator, you might be communicating with another ship. And so you would be sending their call letters to let them know this is, hey, this message is for you. But if you were you were sending just a message out to everybody, that you would start the message with CQ. So that's for everybody. Now CQ didn't mean anything either. It was just, that was the letters they used. They did use D for a distress. So a CQ would be, hey, everybody, there's a distress call here. And the Titanic's operators started using CQD because it was still the most common distress call used. But Harold Bride, this Titanic's second wireless operator, Jack Phillips, the first operator, was working the wireless. They were both there. And Harold Bride kind of jokingly said to him, try using SOS. This may be the only chance you get to use it, which was prophetic. Jack Phillips died that night in the sinking of the Titanic. But SOS really doesn't stand for anything either, but it's easy. It's ... .. So it's easy to hear. Anybody listening can pick that up fairly quickly. But it really doesn't stand for anything. Number 17. Oh, we got another Civil War general here, Abner Doubleday, a major general here. I believe he was a West Pointer. And he's more famous for his invention of the American pastime, the national pastime, baseball. Yeah, Abner Doubleday invented baseball. And if you go to New York, you can find the Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown. And here we have the man who started it all, Abner Doubleday. But is that really true? Did Abner Doubleday really invent the game of baseball? He's famous for that, not for being a Civil War general, but for his invention of our national pastime, baseball. But is that true or false? True or false? And the answer is false. He had absolutely nothing to do with it. And in fact, nobody really knows who invented baseball. It just sort of evolved. Now, Alexander Cartwright published the first rule book, and there were a couple of rule books going at the same time, but he published one in 1845. The game by that time was quite recognizable as baseball today. There were some differences, and there are vintage ball teams today that play. I used to play on a vintage baseball team. It was a lot of fun. You play barehanded. There's no mitts, gloves. So you play barehanded. Yeah, we did. You know, I've got a finger that's never going to quite be the same again. But you play barehanded. A fly ball caught on the first bounce is an out. So that took a little bit of getting used to. There was no sliding, no stealing, no bunting, no leading off base. It was a gentleman's game. And the rules, Alexander Cartwright's rules specified that any ball player would be fined 25 cents, which was a lot of money back then, for drinking alcohol or spitting or swearing. And so when we played baseball, the umpire would fine ball players if they would spit or say a bad word. They got a 25-cent fine. And so we did it just like back then. But baseball probably evolved out of games like cricket, the English game, cricket, rounders, one-eyed cat. There was a game called One-Eyed Cat. The cat was sort of a catapult. And you can kind of imagine a teeter-totter with a ball on one end, a small teeter-totter with the ball on one end, and the striker would step on the other end of it, and that would flip the ball into the air, and then he would hit it and run. But there's a number of the games. One of the early versions, you could put a runner out by throwing the ball and hitting him with it. So that could get a little bit violent. But it goes way back. And yeah, George Washington mentions the men in the Continental Army playing baseball. And he called it baseball. It was 2 words back then, by the way, baseball. Today we use one word. But in fact, Abner Doubleday, myth to the contrary, had nothing to do with it. I'm sure he'd be spinning in his skivvies if he knew that his Civil War service was not remembered, but he was remembered for something he had nothing to do with. Okay, there we go. Well, here's another Civil War general, Joe Hooker, Fighting Joe Hooker, he was termed, but the myth is that our term for a hooker, a prostitute, comes from Joe Hooker. He was a morally disreputable Civil War general, and indeed he was. One officer who visited his headquarters camp said that the Joe Hooker's headquarters was no place that a lady would go and that very few men would want to go. And so out of that comes from the term for prostitute comes from Joe Hooker. And is that true or is that false? True or false? And the answer is false. Now, there is a little bit of truth to it in that I think Hooker may have made the term more commonplace, but it actually goes back long before the Civil War, and the idea is that prostitutes hooked their clients and kind of reeled them in, but General Hooker really didn't have much to do with the term, maybe helping to popularize it a little bit, but it goes back a lot further than Joe Hooker. Well, number 19. This is one that's been come out in fairly recently in history, and I've heard this one a number of times now. But is it true or false? And the myth, at least, is that enslaved African Americans, this is going to the Underground Railroad, that the quilts were used as signaling devices for freedom seekers, people trying to escape slavery and get into northern states or into Canada. And these quilts were not just decorative, that in fact they had meaning, signaling paths to follow, houses that they could, runaways could find food and shelter, directions north to safety and to freedom. And so these quilts would be taken, they would be hung outside, so it would look innocent. You've got a quilt on a clothesline. To the uninitiated, it would mean nothing other than the quilt is drying after being washed. But to a freedom seeker, they would recognize the motifs on the quilt. They would recognize these signals that would guide them to the north and to freedom. But is that true or is that false? True or false?
We say it's true.
You say true. Anybody else want to chime in?
I would say true also.
True also. Okay. Well, it's a great story. Is it true? No, unfortunately, it's not. And I've heard this at a number of museums and so forth, but there appears to be no truth to it. I wish it were. It would be a great story, but there is no contemporary source that mentions quilts being used, and I think it's would be very difficult to do that, to kind of have words spread and people to understand that these symbols meant something, hanging the quilt out. Pretty difficult to do, and there's no contemporary evidence for it whatsoever. So it's a great story. I wish it were true, but it appears not. Number 20, Coca-Cola. Oh, I had Coca-Cola last night. I'm a Coca-Cola fan. Did it have cocaine in it? Coca-Cola, cocaine. It's delicious. Good to the last drop here, as the man says in the ad. But did it really have cocaine in it? Or is that just a myth? True or false? Coca-Cola, did it have cocaine? Anybody take a guess?
We say it's true.
You say it's true. Oh man, okay. Okay. Well, let's see here. Good to the last drop, by the way. That was applied, that was a slogan used for Maxwell House coffee. And that was kind of coined by President Theodore Roosevelt, who had a cup of Maxwell House coffee and kind of smacked his lips. He said, why, that was good to the last drop. And Maxwell House adopted that. But we got to go back to Coca-Cola now. Did it have cocaine in it? Yes, it did. Until 1929, Coca-Cola had cocaine in it. It was invented by a druggist in Atlanta, Georgia, and it had cocaine in it. Back then, sodas were usually served at pharmacies. You would go in and they had ice cream counters in drugstores, and so a lot of the pop wasn't sold in bottles. It was sold in at soda counters in drugstores. And so that's where a lot of these originated. And yes, indeedy, Coca-Cola had cocaine in it. Cocaine was, you could buy it over the counter. It was not an illegal drug at that time. Cocaine, morphine, those were over-the-counter sales. If you read the Sherlock Holmes books, Sherlock Holmes would, when he was bored and he didn't have a case to work on, he would be using cocaine or morphine. And so it was seen, sort of regarded a little bit like tobacco is today, a vice, but nothing that serious. And so, in fact, Coca-Cola had cocaine in it. Yes, it did. Well, but what about a little more modern drink? 7-Up. We've probably all had 7-Up, lemon lime soda. And the mythology is that 7-Up had lithium in it. Yes, it gave you an up. But did it really? Did like Coca-Cola having cocaine in it, did 7-Up actually have lithium in it, a mood stabilizing drug, lithium? True or false?
We say it's false because lithium is used in batteries. So I don't really, so yeah.
Yeah, lithium batteries now, yeah. Well, it is true. Yeah, it really did have lithium citrate in it until 1948. It was originally called bib label lithiated lemon lime soda, soon changed to 7-Up, and yes, indeed, it did give you a bit of an up. Yes, they do use lithium in batteries, but it is also a mood elevating drug. People suffering from depression often will take lithium, and it's a prescription drug. Yeah, and 7-Up did indeed have lithium in it. Number 22. The myth is that the Model T Ford, the most famous car in the world, they made 15 million of them, and it came only in black. As Henry Ford said, the customer could buy a Model T in any color he wanted, so long as it's black. But is that true or is that false? Did the Model T only come in black? Take your best guess. And the answer is, that is false. That from 1908 to 1914, in fact, the Model T, which came out in 1908, but for the first 6 years, it did not come in black at all. It came in red, gray, green, and blue, dark blue, but not black. Henry Ford later changed it to black for a number of years because black was cheaper and it dried fast. But in fact, in the first years, it did not come in black at all. And I said, no, I read that somewhere. And I said, no, that isn't true. It came in black only. And I finally called Jay Folis, who's a curator at the Gilmore Car Museum in near Kalamazoo, Hickory Corners, actually. But Jay is an encyclopedia of automobile knowledge. And I said, Jay, is that really true? Did it not come in black? And Jay said, yeah, that is absolutely true. It did not come in black at all for those a number of years. And I couldn't believe it, but I'll believe Jay on that one. Number 23, the myth. During the stock market crash in 1929, Wall Street brokers jumped out of windows, committing suicide as the market fell and fell and fell. This was October of 1929. I think it lost about 90% of its value in a couple of months. It was an economic disaster, triggering the Great Depression of the 1930s. But did the stockbrokers really jump from windows? And the answer is false. There were 2 suicides by jumping, but actually in the 1930s, suicides were down, surprisingly. But the crash was devastating. The market losing value hit bottom in 1932. And you know when the market, by the way, when the stock market recovered to 1929 levels? 1954, 25 years before it came back up to what it was in 1929. People were afraid that the Depression would last forever, that it was, to use our modern term, the new normal. Somebody asked the economist John Maynard Keynes, have we ever seen anything like this before? And he said, yes, we have. It was called the Dark Ages, and it lasted 500 years. So people were really afraid that the Depression would last forever. Fortunately, it didn't. Well, number 24, the myth. Charles Lindbergh, the Spirit of St. Louis, 1927. He was the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Charles Lindbergh, born in Detroit, Michigan, by the way, but was he the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean? Or did someone beat him to it?
We say false because we think it was Amelia Earhart, the first person to fly solo.
The famous female aviator, Amelia Earhart, was the first. Well, the answer is, it's true. Yeah, Amelia Earhart was later than Lindbergh. And in fact, 2 British flyers had flown the Atlantic. They went from Newfoundland to Ireland. Lindbergh landed in Paris, but they had flown it in 1919, 8 years earlier. But it was the 2 of them. But Lindbergh, in fact, was the first man to solo the Atlantic, became an international hero, one of the most famous aviators in the world because of that. Yeah, it's absolutely true. Okay, well, we're getting to the end here. Number 25, the myth. Well, if you're bad at mathematics, like I am, I have to take off my shoes to count to 20. So if you're bad at mathematics, well, don't worry about it because Albert Einstein was too. He may have been a brilliant physicist, but he was a lousy mathematician. As he's shown here, 6 minus 3 equals 6. Yeah, he's as bad at it. He was as bad at it as I am today. So, but is that true or is that false? Was Albert Einstein really bad at math? Well, the answer is false. He was great at math. Taught himself algebra and Euclidean geometry when he was 12, calculus when he was 14. He was a brain at math. So I have to hang my head in shame when I pull off my shoes to count to 20 because, yeah, Albert Einstein was really great at math and I'm not. So there you go. Well, we do have one bonus question. And here's the bonus question. The myth is that the Historical Society of Michigan, where I work, is our state's oldest cultural organization. But is that true or is that false? And the answer is, of course, it's true. We were founded in 1828 by Lewis Cass and Henry Rose Schoolcraft, and we have been going ever since. So in fact, we are the state's oldest cultural organization. So we're very proud of that. Well, how well did you do? We had 25 questions. This is a freebie, so you can count that whether you got it true or false. How many did you get? Anybody get more than 10?
I got 15 and my mom got 12.
Oh, you beat your mom. All right. And you got 15. That is pretty good. I did this one on a bus tour, and I don't think anybody got over 15 on that. So you did pretty well. Anybody beat that score? Nobody's unmuting themselves. They're all too embarrassed to admit that they got worse.
I only got 10, so.
Betsy got 10. Okay, she's a librarian, so that.
I know, history is not my strong suit.
Okay. Well, I hope you had a little bit of fun with our Myths Busted program this evening. Put in a plug for Historical Society of Michigan. We'd love to have you as a subscriber to Michigan History Magazine. The magazine subscription is usually $24.95, but if you use Bob as a coupon code, you get it for $19.95. Our Chronicle is our members magazine, and if you join the Historical Society of Michigan, you can take $5 off a membership, and you get both magazines using Bob as a coupon code. And I got to put in a plug for the Traverse Area District Library. Support your local library. Our libraries are wonderful resources. You can go to the library and learn all kinds of useless information like you need for Myths Busted, or you can get valuable information there too. And I love libraries. I'm a huge fan of libraries, and they deserve all the support that you can give them. And by the way, if you're a patron of the library, which you are if you're attending History Hounds, or if you're attending this program tonight, our History Hounds lectures are weekly online. They're virtual, so you don't have to drive down here to Lansing. And you can attend those free. You have to register on our website. Just put in that you're a patron of the Traverse Area District Library when you register, and you can attend free. So Betsy, thank you for having me in this evening, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've been promoting a couple of those programs that you mentioned, more specifically coming, I think the only one left on our website is in December, and I've forgotten the date. It's right before Christmas, about Laura Ingalls Wilder, about the Little House books, which I think will be a fantastic program. But on that event, on our website at TADL.org/events, it'll tell you exactly what he says, specific instructions on what boxes to check in to type in to get those programs for free. And when you go in there, you'll see a list of their programs, and you could do any of those programs, not just the one that we're promoting.
Yeah, you can register for, gosh, I don't know what, 6, 7, 8 of them at a time. So you only have to register once for the programs if you check off whichever ones you want. And then we automatically email you the Zoom link for it. So you'll get that in your email box. And we just would love to have you attend. And again, it's free because the Traverse Area District Library is one of our member organizations. As long as you're a patron there, you get to attend free. So we'd love to have you.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate everything that you guys do, and we absolutely love your programs.
Thank you. Great.